Welcome to the latest episode of Five on the Floor, the Five Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app, on Apple Podcasts, on Android, Spotify, or the Five Reasons YouTube channel. Also, check out Off the Floor. That's our Discord server, $2.99 per month. Click on the link right here in the description. You'll bypass the $1 Apple upcharge. You can cancel at any time. We call this the place for the most heat, the most information, conversation, and lately consternation. Check it out, Off the Floor. We are fully pivoting to draft coverage here. Our guys Adele and Matt are breaking it down on our draft channel. We've got 10 different channels and stage shows there. So subscribe today to Off the Floor. Also subscribe to Prize Picks. Use the code 5 FIVE. This one's free. Not only is it free, you put down $5, you get $50 to play right away. The daily fantasy partner of the Five Reasons Sports Network. You can play across the sports spectrum, up to 6 players together, and it is legal again in the state of Florida. So check it out. It's Prize Picks. PrizePicks.com, the Google Play Store, or the Apple App Store. Make sure to get your bonus. Use the promo code FIVE. And now, today's episode.
Mercy, luxurious, Heat Nation, yeah, Mercy and Lago, down in Biscayne. Yikes. 5 on the floor, ride for my dogs. Where here's the thing, you can check the score. Hustle hard, couple scars, wearing bubble frauds. Down in Biscayne, kept the floor playing, got it all banned. Y'all seen the block, stop with one hand. And Pat we trust, Inspire have the guts. We're here to bring the heat, y'all can hang it up.
Welcome to Five on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, Alex Toledo, Brady Hawk, and others from the Five Reasons Sports Network. Also, make sure to subscribe to Off the Floor for the most heat anywhere.
Welcome back to Five on the Floor. Here's today's floor plan. I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick at Five Reasons Sports. Got Alex Toledo. You can follow him at Tropical Blanket. Today is Pat Riley's 80th birthday. Now, we've already done one episode on this about 4 or 5 days ago. Greg Sylvander and I looked at this state of Heat culture in light of Pat turning 80 this week. But now that it actually happened, now that Pat is 80 years old, still a member of the Heat organization, he joined the Heat when he was 50. Now, I'm 52. So I can't even imagine, like, in 28 years, still be essentially running the same business. If I'm running Five Reasons at age 80, just anyway, I don't know. I'll have many reasons by that point to quit. But it is a milestone. It is a milestone to have somebody be with an organization for so long. And so we're going to have Alex on today because I want to approach this a little bit differently because I kind of know where Greg is on this stuff. He is, he's a Pat Riley follower and all that kind of stuff. He's not that much younger than me. I know Greg doesn't like to hear that, but he's basically 1 decade behind me. We kind of have like 4 decades covered here on the podcast. So Alex is in the 3rd spot. I don't know if Brady's heard of Pat Riley, so we're not going to bring him on for this. Wow. But you're the millennial. You're a millennial, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends what you ask. I'm sort of on the cusp there.
Okay, so you're borderline millennial. I'm okay. I don't even know what I am at this point.
Gen X.
Gen X. Thank you. And then I guess I don't know. My daughter's Gen Alpha. She's 10. I don't know.
And Brady's Gen Z.
Brady's Gen Z. Okay, but you're a millennial. And the one reason I want to have you on for this is because I feel like, and I don't want to group all of you together, but I kind of think you're the problem. Not you personally, but your generation here. Because Pat said it a few years ago that the Heat fan base is spoiled. And he's not going to say that now. And I want to make it very clear here. I don't always agree with everything Pat Riley does. I know people think I do. I don't. In fact, sometimes I'm really wrong when I disagree. Like in 2005, where I wrote a screaming column on the top of the Sun Sentinel that Pat had lost his mind trading Eddie Jones in 2005 offseason, and all they ended up doing was winning a championship. Now, of course, as I've said to Sedano many times when he calls me on this, the thing should have blown up, basically. And, Stan ended up walking away and all that stuff. And, but basically then Dwayne went nuclear. But they did win a championship. Okay, so I was wrong on that. Was called out for that. I don't always agree with everything that he's done, but this is where I come in the big picture. And the reason we're talking about this today is because it's his 80th birthday, and I'm looking on Twitter, and not just Twitter, but then Stephen A. and everybody else, and Pat is just getting raked through the coals today because the Heat are on a 9-game losing streak. And I just want to put a little perspective on this from my Gen X. I've been covering the Heat since '96 perspective, and then bring you in on this to maybe speak for your particular generation. And you've been appointed by me. I think you got to go back to when Pat came in, okay, and also what was happening with the other team in town, because this was a football town, okay, nothing even close, and not just the Dolphins, but the Canes also in the '90s and the '80s into the '90s. And when Pat came in, there's this Sports Illustrated cover that one of our listeners actually found today and posted on Twitter about it's basically Riley and Shula. And Riley was the hot new guy here, obviously not new to the NBA. He won championships with the Lakers, had been with the Knicks, etc. And Shula was on the way out. And at the time, Dolphin fans wanted Shula out. Okay, game had passed him by. In that case, there was an alternative, Jimmy Johnson, who'd won championships with UM and then won championships with the Cowboys. And so they pushed. Fans just wanted Shula gone. In 1995, they had like 30 first-round picks on their roster. They got off to a fast start. They flopped. Everybody wanted him out of there. The Dolphins since have not made an AFC championship game. They haven't won a playoff game since 2000. Okay, 2000. Basically, because I didn't even know that wasn't even part of the 21st century. So they haven't won a playoff game since then. In the meantime, Riley has, I think, missed the playoffs a total of 7 times. Okay. They've made 7 NBA finals. They've won 3 championships since just 2006. They've had the biggest stars on the planet here. Not just LeBron James, but also Shaquille O'Neal, in addition to obviously Dwayne Wade, Chris Bosh, Ray Allen, Tim Hardaway, Alonzo Mourning, and on and on and on, and Jimmy Butler. Okay. I am failing to understand how anybody over the age of 20 doesn't understand that the reason you're so pissed off about the struggles of this particular team and sort of the wayward nature of this build at the moment is because Pat raised your standards. Because he made basketball matter in this town, to the point that the Dolphins have spent the last quarter century being jealous of the Heat. The Dolphins, who had 2 undefeated seasons, although one in the undefeated season, but 2 championships way back. And that second championship, I was literally 3 months old. Okay, and again, haven't had a playoff win since 2000. They have been jealous of the Heat for a quarter century because of Pat. They've gone through, it's like almost a dozen head coaches, all kinds of general managers, and everybody with the Heat is still here, or Pat has elevated them since he's been here. Andy Ellisberg elevated to his position with Pat. If Andy was a free agent right now, everybody in the NBA would try to hire him. Eric Spoelstra is having a down season. Pat inherited him, elevated him. If he was on the open market right now, pretty much every team in the league would be trying to get him. Adam Simon, same case, okay? So before we get into where the organization is and what Pat's role actually is, which I don't think people understand anymore, I'll just ask you this, okay? Do you think it's just an age thing here in terms of the frustrations with this? Has the fan base been spoiled to the degree that they don't understand? I understand maybe wanting to go a different direction. We'll talk about what that would actually mean. But it just seems like, I don't know, a lack of appreciation on
It
the
feels,
birthday.
it feels harsh. It feels a little bit too harsh. Like I completely understand the general collective frustration. Like, of course, like how could you not at this point, watching them lose over and over again, like all the kind of the worst ways, that you can lose, whether it's in a blowout or in rough fashion down the stretch of games. No matter like how they're losing, it's become clear that they're far on what they were before, for all their issues, for all the issues that the Jimmy era teams had. you're far off from that. You're far off from playoff contention, all of that. And it happened so suddenly in the middle of the season after, the beginning of the season started with, like there was a little bit of a cloud over the Jimmy situation, the extension situation, but Jimmy came in talking about, like money doesn't mean that much to me or whatever he said, kind of playing it down. And I think just people are still processing that. And this is kind of, some of the ways that it comes out. That's kind of the vibe that I get from it, is that everybody is just mad. Everybody is frustrated, and they're just kind of lashing out. Pat Riley, in ways that, Heat players have been the target in years past, or, every season there's a couple, right? It's been Terry this year, it was Lowry in one year, was Duncan in another year, et cetera, et cetera. There's always people that fans blame. And I think Pat Riley is getting a whole lot of that this season. And I'm not saying he is 100% blameless, but I'm definitely more with you in the sense that it's not all him. He's not this isn't a Wizard of the Oz, the guy behind the curtains.
Well, I think you just muted. No, and I'll continue from here, because I think it is all falling on him to a certain degree here. So I want to clarify something, because I feel like when you've got people like Stephen A. who don't really understand the inner workings of the organization, or Kendrick Perkins, who's out there saying that Pat should step down, there is this assumption that Riley is running the organization with an iron fist, like maybe at times he has. This is more of a collaborative these days. I'm not going to point to the exact stage where it became that, but there are 6 or 7 people who have input on these decisions. Okay. Obviously, you have ownership, and ultimately, the buck stops with them, so to speak. But there are others, okay, who have input here. Adam Simon's been given a lot of leeway on his job. Andy Ellisberg negotiates with other general managers, as does Nick Arison, as do others. Okay, on the day-to-day, Nick is actually more involved than Mickey is these days. Mickey, of course, is based in Doral Carnival. There is this, and you got Zoe, who has some input. There are people in this organization, again, who have input in these kind of decisions, but it always comes back to Pat. My understanding with the Pat situation with Jimmy was Pat wasn't even the angriest at Jimmy. I've said this before on Off the Floor and on playback. He wasn't even the angriest at Jimmy about everything, because he could kind of relate to Jimmy as a player. Others in the front office were more pissed off, okay, about all that. It's just that Pat made the comment at the press conference that, again, inflamed the situation, but it wouldn't have mattered if they weren't going to give him the extension. Jimmy was going to be unhappy regardless. But what I'm saying is, it all sorts of points to him as this flashpoint, and because of that, then you have people saying, well, he should step down. And here's where I come to this. If you're saying that, you don't understand how they work, because they're not bringing in anybody from the outside to replace him. Okay, it would be people that he has basically groomed. Okay, it would be the likes of Andy and Spo and Adam, and again, I Nick with Mickey. This is not. They're not going out to get Bob Myers. Okay, that's not the way that they do things. This is there's a little bit of a Hotel California thing with the Heat. Like, you check in, but you never leave. And so, if people want Pat to step aside, I'm asking, what exactly do they expect to happen? To say that Pat should step aside at this point, more so than I believe he already has on a lot of decisions where he has delegated to others. It wasn't him necessarily that turned down the picks from, for Justice Winslow. It was somebody else in the building. Okay. All of these decisions, they don't all necessarily agree, but they come to some kind of a decision. They vote on it. Okay. And certain people have more sway on certain decisions than other things. But again, if you're saying Pat has to step aside further, I'm asking you, like, do you know that Spoelstra hasn't wanted a certain player that you don't like? Because I know he wanted Rozier. Okay. Do you know, okay, that maybe Andy wouldn't do things the same way, or that Adam wouldn't do things the same way, or that one had input in a decision and didn't on another? I just think it's easy, because Pat is the centerpiece. He's the front man. He's the face. And I get it. And there's a one voice philosophy in this organization. And my frustration, okay, has been, and I've voiced this, but they don't really care. My frustration on this is that you don't really get a voice from the front office to the public. Okay. Because Spo is the voice during the season, but he doesn't comment on personnel stuff.
Mhm.
So you really get nothing publicly. Of course, everything can be worked behind the scenes and certain reporters can find out certain things, but you don't get a front facing person to the fans because Pat speaks basically once a year. Basically, like I'm at Family Fest this Saturday, and by the way, I spoke to Steve Stowe, executive director of the charitable foundation, and that's going to be on the back end of this episode. So make sure you listen to that, and you can sign up for Family Festival, which goes to a good cause at heat.com. But Pat will speak at Family Festival. It won't be about basketball. The media will be told he's not going to talk about basketball, which again, it's a charity event. I get it, but there's no other opportunity to ask him this stuff or to really ask any of the others who were involved in these decisions publicly. And I think that's a frustration for the fan base because they don't know who's responsible for what in that case because they don't have anybody explaining it to them. They just have Spoelstra trying to make the best of what right now is a bad situation, but he's never going to say anything about player acquisition or any of that kind of stuff. I'll ask you, does that, as someone who's been covering the team now for the last 4 years, does it frustrate you that we don't? 6 is it because that long? You're right.
I know.
Does does that frustrate you in any way? Would it frustrate you if you were just in the fan mode now, that you don't really hear from people publicly? The way they do business is different than the way a lot of other teams do.
Yeah, like it feels like you don't get to hear from, the guys making the decisions. Like it's a great point that I hadn't really considered much because it's just kind of the things that we've been conditioned to, the things that we're used to, and how they operate. So like, other teams get to hear from those guys more. Wow, that must be nice for the fans, right? And especially like, not that it would be like a very positive press conference, right? A very productive press conference by getting the fans' feedback. It's going to be a whole lot of vitriol like you've seen today for Riley's birthday. But yeah, for sure, it's a frustrating thing because it's like the people want to direct their frustration somewhere and at least want to hear these guys, kind of address uncomfortable topics. I think that's what it comes down to. They kind of want, this is what the vibe I get is fans want to hear like the front office answer for their mistakes, right? And I'm not saying like that's what I'm saying, but like that's kind of the vibe that I'm getting is like they want them all in a row, like answering for their mistakes and like begging for forgiveness or something because I don't really know what's going to come out of it. Although I would like to
They want a scalp, basically. They want a scalp, and they don't know which scalp they want.
That's a great way of putting it.
So essentially, they're taking our scalps because they're blaming us for fronting for the front office, right? Like that's the thing. Because and so they're coming after the podcasters of the media on this stuff, or nationally, it's after Pat because he has been the face. But again, he doesn't really address the media very frequently anymore. And he's not the sole decision maker on a lot of this. I'm not excusing him. Again, his name is it's still on the marquee. Okay. I'm not excusing some of the decisions that they made, some of which we liked. Okay. Like the Rozier decision. I know that Pat and Spo were the most in on that. Okay, but you and I and Greg and Brady all like the trade, right?
I wish I could go back in time, like like the Interstellar, and just just like bang on the me from a year ago talking about how it would be a nice trade for the Heat. Because my goodness, I don't know if I've ever been more wrong about anything in my life.
We said that before they made the trade. This wasn't like, oh, they made a trade, we're just happy they made a transaction. You and I did a podcast about him, DeJounte Murray. I remember all these podcasts.
I didn't think he was going to solve all their problems, but I definitely was like, okay, they could use somebody of his caliber with that skill set. And man, it's just now all of a sudden there's a very likely chance they keep their pick this year, which means that they lose an unprotected pick next year and in 2028, right? Like, and
it's a disastrous trade, but
they're
it's
on the verge of disaster. They have to be good next year. They have to be.
Right.
And
And that's
like
another whole pod we're going to do about the fact that they're in this position now. And that's what Greg's talking about. Just adding two rookies to this is not going to solve your problem because
there's
then you're
plenty of
giving
reason to
away
be
your pick.
frustrated. I'm not even trying to like push that off, but
I, I,
it
I,
does
I
get a little
think
bit
with all of this,
oversimplified.
well, I think it's oversimplified too, because again, when it comes to the star thing, okay, and on the other side of this, I want to get to that. When it comes to the star thing, it's always about Pat. It's always about Pat because Pat was the whale hunter, right? And then the orca hunter and all that. And Pat made his living in Miami getting disgruntled stars from the very first week. Okay. Zoe, frustrated with his situation in Charlotte. So Pat trades his best player, which at the time was Glenn Rice, made Greg Sylvander cry, and went out and got Zoe and set the foundation, right? Then he went out and got Timmy, who was a third string point guard in Golden State at the time. Then he went out and got Jamal Mashburn, who was having issues with the JJJ group with Kidd and Jimmy Jackson in Dallas, something that had to do with Tony Braxton. Then he went out after that, he got Shaq, right? And he got Goran. He got LeBron was unhappy. Bosh was unhappy where he was. Jimmy was always unhappy, right? So this is how he's made his living. And since 2019, they haven't been able to land that kind of player, other than Lowry, who Jimmy wanted. So they basically caved and gave Kyle an extra year, and that didn't end up working out. So I think when you look at all this, you're like, okay, it's everyone with stars. It's always about Riley, okay, and yet it was Spo who almost got Durant here in 2016 with his presentation, and then obviously there's people who'll say Dwayne had a lot to do with LeBron and Bosh coming. There's more to that story, but all I'm getting at is that I think Pat becomes the face for people who don't follow the team. And I think that's what we're getting from Kendrick Perkins and Stephen A. Smith. Stephen A. is saying Spo should take over. Okay, maybe if Spo doesn't want to coach anymore, there might be some personal reasons he may decide not to. He's been on the road a long time. There's other factors that go into it. But I'm not hearing that Spo wants to stop coaching. He signed an 8-year coaching contract, as far as I understand it. And I know they have Chris Quinn, I guess, in waiting at this point if they wanted to go that direction. But I don't think Stephen A. knows anything about that. And he doesn't know what personnel decisions Spo's been involved in and hasn't been involved in. Okay. And I think this is, and you also have the issue, Alex, where there are certain members of the front office that just don't like to be public. Okay. And so because of that, again, because Pat is the face, he gets the credit. And now at this time, he gets the blame. And that's the way it's been here for a long time. But I'm just trying to tell people as someone who has been around the organization in one form or another for pretty much 30 years, it's not the iron fist Riley in charge of everything that people assume it was, particularly back when Pat was the head coach. All right, we do want to get something from a sponsor here, but I want to talk to you a little bit before we go about where this goes now. All Pro Construction Builders, we know where you should go if you need to get your storm windows. We know in South Florida, hurricane season is always around the corner. Give our guy Danny a call. It's a family business. They use the best materials. They're good people. They're huge Heat fans. They're suffering with you right now. 305 484 4429. That's 305 484 4429. All Pro Construction Builders or allproconstructionbuilders.com. If you mention 5 reasons, you get 5% off. Actually, I think it's 5.5%. Add the 5.5. 5.5% off your entire order. Now from here, okay, I looked back at every decade. So at age 50, Pat had just joined the Heat, which at the time was a wayward organization in a lot of ways. Mickey Harrison made the bold move, went out and got Riley. Riley comes in, immediately sets a foundation, okay, and gets Zoe, and as mentioned, Timmy, Jamal. They put together a very competitive team. Couldn't get past Jordan, couldn't get past the Knicks. Zoe gets sick, transition to the Wade years, and then obviously then you bring in Shaq. So then when Pat was 60, which would be 2005, they were in the first Shaq year, and they were the number 1 seed at that year, but then they lost in the playoffs in the Eastern Conference Finals because Dwayne got hurt and Stan fed Dwayne instead of Shaq in Game 7. They ended up losing to Detroit. Don't go to the finals. Probably would have won a championship that year. The next year they win one. Then you go to age 70 for Pat. That was 2015 after losing LeBron. Okay. We're 10 years out from that. I remember interviewing Pat at that time, right around his birthday when he was turning 70. And he joked again that, Pat retiring to Malibu is the greatest, greatest lie that's ever been told. And he talked about, wanting to win one more championship. And then he and his wife, Chris Riley, would just go off to the south of France. They wouldn't even participate in the celebration. They'd just be gone. That's it. 10 years later, he's still chasing. 10 years later, he's still chasing. They got close. They could have won in the bubble. Dragic gets hurt. Bam gets hurt. They could have won. I think their best chance was the year Golden State won, and Jimmy Shot doesn't go. They end up getting eliminated in the conference finals. Then they go to the finals. They overmatched by Denver, and at that point, Jimmy ran out of gas and didn't have enough help. Is this worse in terms of where the organization is right now than they were when he was 70, which was 2015 after LeBron left?
Oh, that's a good question. Or better yet, that's a tough question. I was not ready for that one. I would say probably. Yeah, I mean, I think you would have to say yeah, just because not that things aren't up in the air now, but what you had at that point was an aging Wade and Bosch, who were of course Wade and Bosch. So like that was cool that they were there, but then of course that ended. Like there was a couple of big plot twists there. So if you're just trying to do it without the hindsight added, even then, I think they're still probably in a better place, not just because they have a little bit of a young core that is set up, even if you don't think it's, you know what I mean? Like they're missing the number one or whatever, of course, like all those things, whatever. There is a foundation in place. Missing maybe the number one piece, missing other pieces, there's, the coach in place. They've got like their, like Simon and Ellisberg and the other guys in the organization that they trust. I feel like there is something there more in place than what they had 10 years ago. Not necessarily organizationally, because of course those guys were there, but personnel wise, like it was an aging roster with not much, to look forward to as far as, the future. So I feel like it's in a better position than it was 10 years ago.
There's this quote from The Dark Knight. What is it? You live long enough to see yourself become a villain, right? You're either the hero, or if you don't die, you live long enough to see yourself as a villain.
Yeah, it's my bit.
That's your bit, right?
Mess up the well-known saying.
Yeah, I messed it up. Well, I call. Oh, here it goes. You either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become a villain.
Yeah,
there you go. I feel like that's kind of what's happened, and I'm using die figuratively in terms of leaving the organization. And it feels like as I'm reading the post, do not read the comments under the Miami Heat's post wishing Pat a happy birthday. Don't, okay? Don't. Because it's ugly stuff, and it's
just not like you're telling people not to. I feel like it's gonna make him do it.
No, well, probably, and I don't mean to do that, but I'm just saying, like, it's so, I don't know. It's ridiculous to me. It's ridiculous to me. Imagine you're a Dolphin fan. Like seriously, like imagine that is your team. And for a lot of people, that's would have been their primary team, except the Heat passed them in terms of their success. And so that's why you see number 3 jerseys everywhere. And for those who are saying, well, Dwayne gave Pat all the success. Well, Pat still had to draft Dwayne. I understand that they said maybe he was going to take Kamen and all that. He drafted the player. You don't say, well, Popovich owes all his success. Well, Duncan, that was easy because he's the number 1 pick of the draft. But you get my point. You still had to take the actual player, okay, and then develop the player, put the player in position to win. All that matters. And by the way, Riley did win a lot of games here before he got Dwayne. Okay, they had a very competitive team. They were the number 1 seed twice in the late '90s. So all of that. I think is just sort of totally out of context and incorrect. But I'm reading this stuff and I'm just like, people just have no perspective on history. Like, again, they missed the playoffs. Like, I think was it 7 times? I think in his entire tenure, they've been to as many finals as they've missed the playoffs during that period of time. But again, to pivot forward here before we close, if you're saying they're in a slightly better position, that's one thing. But also, the man is 80 years old. Okay, and you get to a certain age and you're not as patient. He, at least, or the organization with him still in some sort of a leadership role, has been patient. I know Heat fans are not happy with it, but they've been patient. In fact, the big argument from Heat fans is that they've waited too long to do things, right? They haven't struck for the star, even though some of those circumstances were beyond their control. But again, nobody wants to hear that. But they haven't struck for the star. They didn't trade Jimmy a year early instead of a year late. That's the new one, right? That they should have shopped him anyway the year before. Like, they've been patient. The one time they acted was the Rozier deal, right? Obviously, not just getting Lowry. Do you expect him to remain patient here? Because I mean, he's not doing this to be a play-in president. I don't think. What's the point?
It's a great question. And I think I'm going to loop in something that I was thinking about as you were talking there earlier, when you mentioned people are not, accounting for the history, right? And the perspective of everything he's done, like the bigger picture, right? And just kind of focusing more on, the recency bias aspect of it. And I think that really, informs the perspective. I think it's a, and again, it's valid stuff. Like, there's plenty of reason to be frustrated, but it's like they were in the middle of a contention window for years. Like you mentioned, they were so close. You had the 3 different long playoff runs, 2 of them in the finals, another one in the conference finals, and all 3 were plagued by injuries in different ways and different degrees, but they were plagued 100% by, like, you mentioned 2022 being their best shot. Like, that team was banged up by the time the season ended. They tried to bring back Hero, it didn't work out. I remember, like, Strus, Tucker were banged up. Jimmy missed a game in the conference finals. Oladipo was Oladipo. Like, they every single time that they had a long playoff run, they were dealing with stuff. So I think dealing with that, right, then with kind of the promise from year one about, oh, we're gonna land that second star for Jimmy, that was used against him, right, for years, right? That's like bubbling under the surface. And then this year, like I mentioned earlier, it just explodes in such a way, like, I don't know how much worse it could have, like, ended. Like, the Jimmy era, it ended in such an ugly way. It was public, and then you've got now a 9-game losing streak that looks like it's going to be a 10-game losing streak, just to be frank, because the Rockets have won 8 in a row and are a really good team. Like,
well, Jimmy's team has won 80% of his games since he's got there, which has made it worse. Even if his scoring is down, his shooting percentage is down,
but it proves
they're
the
winning.
theory,
They're
because
winning.
it's what fans wanted. It's like, oh, you get that other star next to him, and it puts Jimmy into that role. And I'm not saying the Heat didn't feel that way too. Of course, we know that they pursued stars. Maybe you can say they should have pursued harder, whatever. That's besides the point. But all of that, I feel like, informs this blow up that has happened here, where now Riley has become the scapegoat, and he is the target. And yeah, like, it's they made a trade there with Terry. Ended up being, it's looking like one of the worst trades in Heat history. The Jimmy thing blew up in their face in such an ugly way. They're in the middle of this losing streak. Like, I feel like all of those things are informing, why it's so ugly. But then, I'm sorry, I went on a complete tangent there, and I didn't even answer.
No, but you make a good point here, because, like, this is the absolute, like, worst case scenario in terms of the way that this is played out at the moment. It doesn't mean they can't dig their way out of it. They have before.
It's like, you didn't get Jimmy the star, and then you also lose him in the middle of the year, and you suck without him. It's
right, and you're also in a position now where
next year.
Well, but here's the other thing. And then you're also in a situation where I know they wanted the Golden State pick and they were wise to get it, but now Jimmy's playing at a high enough level and has fit in well enough there that the value of that pick keeps decreasing. So you have all of these things that are working against you. You have
Wiggins not playing.
Wiggins is not playing. He's playing less than Jimmy, okay, which that's not good either for the optics. And then you also have, again, the trade guy that you got from last year is someone that now you can't wait to get rid of. You've got your 2 young players other than the one you drafted this year, Jovic and Jaquez, who for assorted reasons are not the assets maybe they were before. Although I think Jovic had a pretty good year before he got hurt. He was starting to find his way, but Jaquez has been not good this year. So that doesn't help his trade value either, if that's the direction you want to go. It's all like all these circumstances. But here's the thing I'll say about this, okay? And this is where we'll close. And there's so much more that we could do on this, and that's why we're kind of a little bit all over the place. Is that they have, because of their stability, which I know frustrates Heat fans now, okay? Because they want to see something new. They think like they're going to bring up Bob Myers or something like that. That's not happening, okay? Because of their stability, they've been able to dig out of messes before because they have institutional knowledge of each other. Okay. And again, you look at the top people in the organization, many of them are those that Pat gave opportunities to that might not have gotten opportunities other places. You look at Spo came out of the video room, Andy Ellisberg came out of the media department, okay, or the PR department. Okay. Adam Simon was not considered to be what he is now when he started getting elevated by Pat. So you take a look at these guys that they've got now. There's institutional knowledge between all of them. Obviously, you got Zoe in the mix there as well and others. And that has helped them get out of these situations before. When you have that kind of stability, when the coach knows he's not going to get fired, I know sometimes that frustrates the fans, but ultimately sometimes it does also help you find a pathway out. This is an organization that had its franchise player get sick with kidney disease in 2000, that lost another of its stars after they had committed. That Zoe had lost another of its stars as after they committed to him in a huge way in Bosch to blood clots, not once but twice with his retirement. They've had some things go against them, all the way back to Juwan Howard getting taken away by David Stern way back when, and Pat pivoted, got Dan Marley, and I think that team actually turned out to be a better fit than it would have been otherwise. They have found their way out of these situations before. They were in a rut with the Whiteside contract, the Dwayne, and now obviously Dwayne leaving, which was controversial, the Whiteside contract, the Waiters contract, the JJ contract. I'm talking about James Johnson. And then Jimmy came, okay, and that changed the dynamic again. They just need a lightning bolt at this point. But sometimes it's easier to get the lightning bolt when, again, people who've been there have been working together for a long time. So I'm not going to excuse Riley or anybody else in the organization for the product we're seeing on the court right now. It sucks. It's not up to their standards. They know it. Okay. But I also always am going to give them the benefit of the doubt that I don't give, say, the Dolphins, okay, or some of the Panthers, I will at this point, but the Dolphins, because they found their ways out of this. They don't end up like Sacramento. They don't like was for 15 years out of the playoffs. And here's the last part, and I'll let you close on this. Heat fans who say that they're okay with tanking or a rebuild and all that, they can't even take a month of this stuff. They can't even take a month. You think this fan base is going to be able to take 4 or 5 years of a build like we've seen in Detroit? Look at Detroit. They're finally coming out of it now. This is like a decade later.
Definitely not. I think that's I think that's taken for granted is how easy or not easy it is to, successfully complete a rebuild and have everything go the way you want it to, right? Where like, I don't know, like people are already talking about, and I understand there's some reasoning behind this. It's not for nothing, but people are talking about they should go into a full reset and think about trading Bam and Tyler and seeing what you can get and just starting all over because those guys are not going to want to deal with it for multiple seasons. We know the Heat are not going to operate that way. They're going to try to rebuild this thing as soon as possible. They're not going to go into a full rebuild where they just completely bottom out. And you're 100% right. The fans would not be able to take it for as much as they act like they would. It's so reactionary. Again, I'm not saying there isn't any logical, like basis to that line of thinking. I get it. I just don't think anything like that is going to happen. It feels more like because of this situation they've put themselves in where they, for many different reasons, maybe, like a little bit of arrogance involved, a little bit of, thinking that everything was going to fall your way. They're here now, like they fumbled the end of what was a great era and kind of left people with a sour taste in their mouth there. Again, like we mentioned, the Terry trade, everything that you mentioned with their young guys, like it just feels it's a little bit aimless right now, even though you got some pieces set up there. And all in all, with the way they're set up, they have to be good next year. They can't, like this roster, even if you come back and whatever, you have a training camp with them, I'm sure like that'll help. Okay. Even with that, sorry, I don't know if you can hear me right now.
Yes, now I can.
So even with that and like the two rookies you add, if you go through with the picks, like they're not going to be a good team. They'll probably be below 500 if, like for however good the two young players are and whoever leaps you get from next year, like, are they going to be above 500? I would be skeptical of that. And I think if you have another bad season where if it's something even worse than just you're not 500, if it's you're one of the worst teams in the league, You know, like it's a complete disaster if you end up giving up like the number 6 pick or something, number 7 pick in the draft to the Thunder next year, and then have to do it again 2 seasons after. They can't avoid that. They're now like in this self-fulfilling prophecy where they have to rebuild their way. They have to rebuild on the fly. Like, you know what I mean? Like now, if it wasn't for this draft situation, maybe they could have, even if I don't think that's what they would have done, they could have tried it a different way. Now they have to. You can't just be bad next season and then give up a great pick. You can't let that happen now.
It does seem like circumstances have forced directions here a little bit of late. For instance, the Jimmy thing. He forced their hand into this. Okay. He did, but the way he acted and the fact that ultimately, they were comfortable being uncomfortable to a point, and then he made it so impossible,
I'm still
untenable.
skeptical that they were going to pay him, but I guess that's a separate conversation. Maybe we can
They would have sat down. They would have sat down with him. That I know.
Oh, I'm sure.
They would have sat. They would have sat down with him, and they not what he got from Golden State. No, they were not. But again, they needed Golden State to give that to him because otherwise they wouldn't have been able to execute the trade. Now we'll take a look in the future whether or not that trade works out. Unlike the Rozier trade, I'm not ready to call that trade an unmitigated disaster yet because we'll see what Wiggins becomes, and if they keep Davion Mitchell, which is another question we're going to get into here, and then obviously what they end up doing with the pick. So I'm not ready to bash that trade yet. Okay, that is not done yet, but I know fans have issues with how it got to that point. And, we're going to debate that when we do a bunch of Jimmy Butler pods coming up on his return next week. All right, we got into a whole bunch of stuff here. We appreciate you taking the time. If Alex can execute it now that we're at 41 minutes, I had a conversation with Steve Stowe, and we're going to try to get to that next.